Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, you're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else, not on the media, and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Opportunity Project. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to another edition of Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project. Dan Proft is taking this fine Sunday off, well-deserved. Joining me in his stead is Brian Timpone. Brian, as you know, friends of the show, Brian's been on before. Brian is a newspaper person, a media person. He's responsible, along with Dan and others, for publishing a bunch of local newspapers that are going to be relevant to our conversation today. Brian, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start one of your publications this week. And which one was it? Remind the folks of who it was.
Prairie State Wire.
The Prairie State Wire, which is a great publication, did a report today because Jim Durkin, everybody knows who Jim Durkin is. Jim Durkin is the minority leader of the House Republican organization. He's facing a primary challenge by a gentleman named Mickey Straub, who's the mayor of Burr Ridge. Conservative reformer. Mayor Mickey's a great guy. He's a friend of mine and someone that I support tremendously against Jim Durkin, who has proven himself to be ineffective, feckless, been down there for 20 years, takes money from Democrats and everything else. Brian, tell the listeners, your newspaper did a couple of stories on Jim Durkin, and then it got a little hinky. Tell us what happened.
Well, look, Jim Durkin has a primary challenge. It's his first competitive election, maybe ever. And so when you're in a competitive election, the media focuses on it. And we have a reporter who is covering the race. And he actually didn't even write stories. He just kind of asked Durkin some simple questions about germane issues, one of which is a capital bill that's being carried around Springfield. And there were some rumors that some of the road builders and the beneficiaries of that bill had agreed to give campaign contributions to Durkin.
Oh, imagine that.
If he supported the bill. And our journalist called his campaign and asked if it were true. He didn't write about it. He just called and asked if it were true. And the response wasn't yes, no. It was a letter from a lawyer. A letter from a lawyer doing what? Threatening what? Cease and desist. Threatening us.
Or there's going to be a defamation lawsuit.
Right. Threatening us, saying he was going to sue us if we wrote about it.
And then then it happened again, right?
It happened again, right? So there was there's another local story that's of real interest in the district. Broadview is a southwest suburb. And there was a strip club that was going to be built in Broadview. And one of the guys pushing the strip club is a guy named David Donahue, who is kind of an infamous aide to Michael Madigan, and very controversial. But some people might like his approach if you're into strip clubs. And he was going to build this strip club, and there's some litigation around it. And Jim Durkin was named in the litigation as having set up a meeting between the mayor of Broadview and Dave Donahue
to potentially facilitate a strip club going into Broadview.
Exactly, and so we called to ask him whether this was true and whether if he wanted to counter what was said, because it wasn't a public court document, and he responded with a letter from a lawyer.
And this lawyer, Patrick Walsh, is that his name?
Patrick Walsh.
Is sending these sort of cease and desist letters, threatening litigation, saying what's going on is defamatory. And just so guys, everybody's listening knows, so I've been a lawyer for, I don't know how long, it's like 20-something years now. And, Jim Durkin, like a lot of politicians, but particularly Jim Durkin, because he's a leader, ostensibly a leader, is in the newspapers all the time. He's on television all the time. He's what's deemed a public figure. So the standard for defamation for a public figure is almost impossible to prove. It's very, very difficult. And there is clearly no indication of defamation in this instance because, again, politicians take the slings and arrows of being public, and that's just the nature of it. And so in order to win a case of defamation against someone like Jim Durkin or any other public figure, it would have to be this sort of egregious, the standard's actual malice, malicious intent, that you were saying something negative or bad about them or defamatory about them, which clearly in this instance hasn't happened. But that's not the real reason why Pat Walsh is sending these letters, right? He's not sending the letters because he thinks there's been any defamation. He's sending the letters for two reasons. Number one, he wants to get out ahead of the idea that Jim Durkin is being exposed for things that he's done for years, whether it's taking money from road contractors, whether it's negotiating a deal in Broadview potentially to put in a strip club, which in a Republican primary would go over so poorly, right? So he wants to get ahead of that. And secondarily, he wants to intimidate you, right? He wants to say, hey, if you don't stop saying truthful things or investigating my clients, then I'm threatening you with action he knows isn't going anywhere. So it's intimidation.
That's right. And look, I think that it's a cautionary tale for journalism. I mean, it's hard to do journalism, to be fearless if you don't have the financial wherewithal to withstand these types of threats. Most newspapers, if they got a letter from a lawyer, and I'm sure Mr. Walsh has sent these before, or maybe Jim Durkin sent them before, they would be intimidated and they would stop writing about it. And I have a lot of experience working with different media organizations, and I've seen this play out. Look, these letters don't go unread, and they do make an impact. In our case, we think these are really important issues for this election. Jim Durkin, the criticism of Jim Durkin is that he plays too happily with the Democrats, and if he actually has a relationship with this Dave Donahue, who's a top Madigan guy, then people need to know that, and it's worth exposing. It's not some sort of this isn't some agenda against Durkin. This is a real important issue, and trying to intimidate us away from actually reporting on it really is beyond the pale.
Yeah, what I think is so funny about this is so often the people that you're reporting on, the people that sort of are collective organizations. Everybody knows I'm involved in politics in my private life, both through Illinois Liberty PAC and to a certain extent the Illinois Opportunity Project, which I co-founded with Dan Proft and John Tillman, is this idea that, it's all fringe stuff and these newspapers are fringe and they're not real papers and they're not getting to anybody and this is all irrelevant. Well, if it's all irrelevant, why are you threatening lawsuits when there are articles being written, right? So clearly there's an impact that's happening for Representative Durkin in his district in this primary, and they're sort of showing their hand of how relevant these publications are by, throwing up these empty threats.
It's also emblematic of where we are in Chicago media, that there is no other local media that have been looking into these issues over the years. I mean, this strip club issue is not a new one. It's litigation that's been going on for years. And, look, no one's ever asked him this question. So in some level, he's not used to it, and he should be more used to it, being in the prominent position that he's in. Yeah,
it'd be really interesting to see, once you don't cease and desist from reporting things that you believe that are necessary to be reported and that your reporters are doing the work that they're doing, when these lawsuits hit. My guess is going to be that they never hit, because it's one thing for a lawyer to send a cease and desist letter. It's another thing to go into a court of law from an ethical and otherwise perspective and make allegations that you can't sustain, right? And lawyers, they don't want to do that because they can get in trouble and there's ethical violations. So this is all really, Brian, part of a political process, and it goes to a major point, and that major point is entitlement. Jim Durkin has been down there for all these years. He's entitled. He feels like he has no repercussions to anybody other than, of course, the cronies that he has down in Springfield, whether it's on the Democrat side or the Republican side, because there are bad people on the Republican side as well. And now that entitlement, because of Mickey Straub, because of the organizational heft behind the campaign of Mickey Straub and others, the entitlement is being challenged. And he's being exposed on a lot of fronts for the first time. And that makes him very uncomfortable. You said at the beginning of the show that he might be facing a challenge for the first time electorally. Think about this. This guy is the leader of the House Republican organization, and there's no electoral challenge. It's almost like he's appointed. It's like a fiefdom, right? And now that fiefdom is getting challenged. And with that challenge comes pressure and panic and all the things that you've done because you figured you'd never have to worry about, owning up to them, are now coming out of the wash, and it's causing them tremendous stress.
I'm really surprised. I was really surprised that he would send letters like this, having been in politics for 25 years. It shows he's really not a battle-tested politician in kind of the media sense. He hasn't faced this type of criticism. And ironically, like a Michael Madigan, who seems to be at the center of everyone's campaign, has faced lots of criticism. He would never send a letter like this because he understands what it's really about. He gets that, hey, you're going to get criticized in politics. People are going to ask tough questions. You got to come up with the answers.
Yeah, and I think the really important part here, Brian, in addition to everything else that we've already talked about, is the notion that, you need to have a thick skin, and the people want you to be tougher than this. In my view, if I were a constituent of Jim Durkin, I'd be like, stop sending off cease and desist letters. This state is going out of business. If you're going to be a leader, you need to be a tougher, stronger leader with a thicker skin if you're going to lead me and get my vote in the future.